Okay, all of you YouTubey people, I'm here. There's like a light. Okay, I'm gonna move this because I don't like the way it looks when it looks like there is a light growing out of my head, and you can see my mess behind me. YouTube people, we're just gonna change that up because that bothers me personally. And there's a cat there. Okay. All right, now we're gonna get started. Hold please for theme song. Hello and welcome. So, this is the podcast I Do What I Want. I am your host, Hollis, and it's been a while. So, if you follow my Instagram, I don't know what I was trying to say. I was trying to like blend several different social media names together there. If you follow my Instagram, or even check out my shorts, here on YouTube, you'll see that I've got a video where basically I've been having some health issues lately. I am going to be taking this podcast down to just one episode a month because a part of managing my health problems and getting better means that I need to take things down a few notches. As I've mentioned several times before, I still have a full-time job. I still have other things that I do besides writing books so that I can afford, my lifestyle and rent and cat food for the cats and all that good stuff. Wow. I am trying to, make enough money writing books so that I can just afford my lifestyle doing that. But I've got a busy life and I need to de-stress and declutter my calendar. And so I'm taking the podcast down to one episode a month. And I think that I hope that that'll work out well for everyone. I'm going to still try to be posting shorts all the time and little random videos and things like that will hopefully be helpful and be great. And obviously, you can always message me, DM me on Instagram, comment, YouTube, do the things. You feel free to communicate with me. My website, hollisjoemccullumauthor.com. It's direct link to email me on the website, all of that jazz. You can join my mailing list. I don't send that many emails, maybe one a month. And it's usually an update that if you're following me, you want to hear about it because I'm telling you when books are released and cool stuff like that, right? But seriously, I think it's been like 2 months since I sent an email. So I don't spam you. If you join my mailing list, it does not become a problem. If anything, I should probably do it more. Anyway, in this episode, I wanted to talk a little bit about the differentiation between my two different book series. So I went to, my husband and I decided to just go out to get a bite to eat this evening, and he started asking me some insightful questions. And we had a conversation, but I honestly didn't realize that he actually was confused a little bit about whether or not the two different book series that I write had a unifying factor. And the answer is they don't. But through he kept looking for one because I am the same author of both of those series. So he was trying to equate it. And you know what? It made sense. I was thinking, you know what? That's actually it makes a good point because I am the same author and a lot of authors do, they might write some different series, but maybe all of their books, all of their series have a unifying factor, whether it's the world or a character or something like that. But and I don't think I'm unique, but I'm a little more rare in that I am one author, but I have two totally different, completely separate book series. And they are both fantasy, but one is classic epic fantasy or dark fantasy, as some people say. And the other is historical fantasy. And so I thought I would kind of do the little pitch or just a very brief rundown. This episode's actually going to be pretty short, but a brief rundown on each series and talking about, okay, this is this one, this is that one. This is why they're two totally different things. The worlds will never cross. That's never going to happen. That's no, sorry. As the author, and I don't even think sorry. I don't think anybody has ever requested that. Even people who have read both of my book, both the two different series of the books that I have out thus far, they have no one's wanted that because it doesn't really make sense it doesn't make any sense for them to blend actually. So let's do the 30-second pitch. If you were just a brand new person going, what are you about? I would say, hi, I'm Hollis. I write two different book series. They are completely separate. The first series that I write is called the Rashawn series. This is an epic fantasy series. It is focused on more epic adventures, classic fantasy themes, and takes place on a separate world. And the unifying factor of the entire Rashawn series is the world in which it takes place, which is the world of Rashawn, hence the name of that series. And then the other separate series that I write, which is a historical fantasy series, that one is centered around a character, Lucretia, who is an immortal being who is forced to curse herself to immortality and is actually going through this various stages of grief over a couple thousand years. And this collection of books, which is an ongoing series of historical fantasy, takes place totally different world, everything else. And the series is called The Lost Beacon Chronicles. And that one is different. So those are the two, and they're two very different. For example, the Rashawn series, more it's not categorized as YA, it's categorized as fantasy, but honestly, if a younger kid or teenager, not a child, I mean, the reading level is just not there, and for like a child, but I would say from middle school age upwards, the Rashawn series is safe. That's good. That one's nice. The Lost Beacon Chronicles, that one's got a lot of trigger warnings. It is historical fantasy. I am talking about as I've mentioned before, my degree is in world history, and history is a messy, violent, messed up story. And those books have a lot of that messed up stuff in them. So the Lost Beacon Chronicles is honestly not something that I would recommend for younger readers at all. I would recommend that, and even some adult readers, because again, trigger warnings. You have genocide. You have all these crazy things. You have a lot of trauma. There's a lot of psychological things, and so the Lost Beacon Chronicles, while I have a lot of great feedback from it, that one is a much more emotionally mature series that I not so, and it's definitely not as lighthearted. So let's dig into that. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's dig in. First thing I want to do is talk about the Rashawn series, my nice fantasy, epic fantasy. We've got main characters mostly being elves, taking place on a fantasy world, completely made up place called Rashawn. And the world of Rashawn, the first book in this series is To Save a World, which it is, of course, available for purchase. The second edition of the book is the better edition because that's the one that has the full map in it and all my pretty illustrations and is better edited. Same exact story, but yeah, buy my second edition. Plus, the cover of the second edition matches the cover of the second book, The Queen Witch, which will flow into the cover of the next. It basically, and all the covers are going to look so gorgeous, all lined up on the shelf, and it's going to be so pretty. The first edition to Save a World, which is out of publication. I know that there are still some copies being sold because it just went out of publication this year. So obviously Amazon still has some in stock and so on and so forth. But I originally published it without writing a series in mind back in 2017. And while I designed that cover and I think it's gorgeous, it's not it doesn't match. And I just it was the first book I ever published. It wasn't as visually everything that I wanted it to be in the page layout, and it wasn't everything I wanted. So second edition of To Save a World, which was published this year, is better. So get that one. But it takes place in this world that's, it's L you have, let me think, 3 main humanoid races on it. Oh, no, well, I don't know, I might add dwarves on there. I don't think I have any dwarves. I have, um, humans, of course, elves, and demons. And demons are just another humanoid race on the world of Rashan. There's no religious context to that or anything like that. They, they visually they have a lot of horns and tails and come in like funky, fun colors and all that sort of thing. Maybe some of them have tusks and whatnot. So they visually look a little bit more demonic than of what our concept of that would be, but they're just people. they're they're just people on the world of Rashan, and they're just a different humanoid race with a different, culture and ways. And there are good ones, there are bad ones, there are totally neutral ones, and there are ones who don't give a crap about anything and they just want to live their lives and be left alone. And that is the normal way of things. That's how they are. And then, of course, in the world of Rashan, magic is commonplace. Being a wizard or a necromancer or something like that, that's perfectly acceptable, not out of the ordinary. You would expect it like most fantasy novels. So, most fantasy worlds, like, I always like to reference the Dragonlance series. That's my favorite fantasy series of all time, the world of Kryn. And I write the Rashan series kind of with that structure in mind. So in the Dragonlance series, of course, you had like the first books with the main characters that everybody loves, and then there were, of course, they got really popular, and a lot of other authors picked it up and wrote books in the series. Which, hey, maybe if I'm like the luckiest girl in the whole world, the Rashan series will take off, and other people will want to contribute to it, and that's a fun fantasy to have. But the unifying factor of the Rashan series is the world itself and not the characters. Now, the books I have written thus far, and the third book in the Rashan series, which is coming out in 2024, called Tear in the World, that still focuses on the core cast of characters. You've got, the main four are Ethne, Darian, Aram, and Yoselin, and they are your core cast in the first 3 books. But I'm just doing this to establish the world. Those are your characters, but I am going to write trilogies, as well after. I'm going to do a trilogy called The Histories for the world of Rashan, and that will be just totally different people, things that happened previous to the Heavenly Wars and the death of the gods, and all of that character, what happened in Rashan before that. These characters that you haven't heard of, but they were living on Rashan. Rashan is the unifying factor. They will be being in cities that you're familiar with, possibly even meeting some of the much more ancient, older characters from the first couple of books, all that sort of thing. And that will be the Histories trilogy. And then you've got, and then I'm going to do an Origins trilogy where I take, like, I've actually had several people, the main villain character, if you like, in the first book, To Save a World, and no spoilers, but this is just a name, but the main bad guy is named Cavan, Cavan, which I think it's old Irish, like Gaelic or Celtic Irish, and it actually means like hollow or empty. So that's why I picked the name Cavan for the the guy. But a lot of people have asked me, what's his origin story? Because when you meet this character in the first book, he just kind of comes up. He's already a threat. And I've actually had a few people, a few readers of the book say, I'm curious about this guy's background. I understand what he is in this story here, but like, how did he become this powerful bad guy? And so I'm gonna write an origins trilogy as well, where I take characters. Kavan will be the first. The title of Kavan's origin story, which is where I'm going to talk about him, is I'm calling it a lack of empathy. Which, if many of you already know, if you listen to my podcast or have spoken to me at all, one of my personal interests is psychology, study of the human mind. I am not a psychologist at all. It is just a personal interest. I do my own reading on it, but the things I say are simply my interpretation of the things that I have read about psychology, and I am by no means here to give advice, but I do use psychology and those sorts of things a lot for inspiration in characters and situations and, of course, reactions and all that. The human mind is very intricate and inspiring to me as a writer, and the study of it thus. But a lack of empathy is a very, characteristic trait of a psychopath. And Kavan is, in my mind, when I write him, he is a true psychopath. And so, but his origin story is going to reflect that psycho. So that will be another trilogy, and that will be the Origins trilogy. However, the Rashawn series will still have a main line of like a linear line of books: the To Save a World, the Queen Witch, and Terror in the World, and then there will be a volume 4 later on down the road. But those will all be kind of interwoven, and it will all make sense together because it's all taking place on Rashawn. And I will be mentioning, I'll definitely, don't worry, readers, you will know when these things are happening. I will give you context. I promise it's going to be fine. I'm very good about that because as a reader, I like context. I like to know when things are happening in the history of, I could probably tell you the history of Kryn from the Dragonlance series. That's the world in the Dragonlance series. For those of you who don't read that series, yeah, I'm super familiar with Kryn. I know its histories. I know, so yeah, I can tell you their timeline real well. But that is the Rashawn series, and the Rashawn series, I'm really excited about it. Again, it is more classical fantasy. It's a little lighter. It's less, obviously, it has its heavy moments. The characters have to save the world, for goodness sake. It gets a little rough, but it's something that is definitely more suitable for um uh, adolescent to and teenage, and readers of all ages. I have had people as old as 80 read my books and love them, and as young as, I think my youngest reader so far that I'm aware of was 13, and she gave me a lot of props. She liked it a lot. So it's it's one of those things. I like that a lot. Shifting gears, my other completely separate series. Once again, these two series have no relation to one another. The worlds will never touch. It doesn't cross. Doesn't happen. There is absolute, the only thing these two series have in common is the writer. That's me. So again, and that's something that, yeah, again, in our discussion over dinner this evening, because he kept, my husband kept looking for a thread to connect the two, and I I was just looking at him going, well, this series is this and that series is that. He was like, yeah, but are they all connected? And I would say, no. This series, it's a series, and it'll all be connected here. And this series is another series. It'll all be connected there. And he was like, okay, but they're all connected. I was like, no, they are not. All of the books in each separate series are connected, but the two series will never, ever, 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 ever touch. They're not even going to look at each other. They're no, totally separate, completely unaware, different, different, different. No. So, Lost Beacon Chronicles. That one is historical fantasy. And in so Spare the Swallow is the origin story of that. So for those of you, who have read Spare the Swallow, have a copy of it, you will see, and I know not everyone reads my introductions, but in Spare the Swallow, there's an introduction that I write in the book. It's only a paragraph long, but I basically I tell you, I say, look, this I tell you this is a historical fantasy novel. I love history. It's my thing. And the Docven race that I have made up are in my mind, they are a translation of the ancient Etruscans of Italy and what happened to them. And so I do say that in the introduction. Again, I know not everybody reads the introduction, but I actually straight up tell you, hey, I am translating ancient Earth history into fantasy. And you can think of it as a parallel universe if you like. And that's something that, like the Marvel movies all take place on, well, not all take place on Earth, but there's a lot that happens on Earth and in New York, but that's considered like a parallel universe in our imaginations to this. So you can think of Lost Beacon Chronicles as a parallel Earth but with magic, and where instead of the Etruscans just being, not just, but being an ancient people who were human beings, which they were in this universe, uh, but instead they were a totally other humanoid race, and elves once existed on this world and everything else, but they're all gone now, and modern humans in my version, in that version in the Lost Beacon Chronicles series, modern humans have no concept that any other humanoids ever existed to civilization besides human beings, Homo sapiens. That's it. But in the world that I have created, a lot of those ancient cultures, they were other races. And again, I do say this in my introduction of Spare the Swallow, where I talk about, hey, these are representative of the ancient Etruscans. Now, I made up the name Docfen and called them that, and I obviously changed some things, but I translate a lot of historical Easter eggs in. And so in Spare the Swallow, Lucretia, I'm not going to go into how or spoil any of that for you. She curses herself. She's forced to curse herself with immortality for reasons I will not explain because I want you to read my book. And then the Lost Beacon Chronicles is her journey through the 5 stages of grief over a couple thousand years. Because trust me, if you read Spare the Swallow, you will understand why it would take her, you know, centuries to process this. The trauma and the PTSD and the layers of all of it, and the triggers and the blah blah, all of that, and the relapses, everything. You'll get, if you read Spare the Swallow, you'd be like, oh yeah, totally. That would take a couple thousand years. Yep, wouldn't be able to process that. Mm-mm. So and I'm looking at notes here if you're watching the YouTube and you see me looking down because I sometimes forget. Again, I am not a psychologist. I just find it extremely interesting and I like to read up on it. But the idea for the whole series of Lost Beacon Chronicles is that the character Lucretia, who is the main, who is the common factor through the entire series. So well, the Rashawn series is united by the entire world, and that is your common thread through every single book in the series. Every single book in the series, The Lost Beacon Chronicles, is united because of this one character, and we're following her. She is the Lost Beacon. In Spare the Swallow, the gods call her their beacon. And again, I'm not going to tell you why, but that's why this is the Lost Beacon Chronicles, because she is lost. She is lost in her heart, and she's the beacon. So we follow her. She is going through the 5 stages of grief, which are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Obviously, we do not get to acceptance until it takes, yeah, we're not gonna get there really for, pretty much the whole series, but and what a lot of people might not understand is you don't go through these in order. The 5 stages of grief, you can volley around, you can ping pong from one to the other, be depressed for 5 minutes and then be in denial for 3 years. You can do whatever, you know what I well, 5 minutes is an overstatement, but you know what I mean. It's not something that happens in a linear fashion, and it's not that once you go through one, you are automatically done with it and, never return to this. No, you can be in denial for a while, get to bargaining, and then bounce right back into denial if something happens to cause you to backstep or whatever. So the Lost Beacon Chronicles is twofold really fun to write for me. It's a little, it gets a little heavy and dark because we are talking about a very rough situation for the character, but we're talking a lot about the stages of grief, how this particular person is having to process all of this incredible trauma that has occurred, how the world is continuously changing. She is an unchanging thing, an unchanging beacon in the world, an immortal. She doesn't age, she doesn't do and she can't die. Nothing can kill her. She is unkillable, and believe me, she wishes she could. She doesn't want to live, she has to live. Everyone that she ever loved in her first life, all of that, they're all gone. Everything was ripped away from her. She is literally the only thing left of an entire culture and civilization. And she wishes she weren't around anymore, but she has to be around. And and she, and she's got to equate all of that, plus deal with the loss, plus deal with, what she had to do, everything, everything, everything. So she's dealing with all those stages of grief. She's dealing with the world changing around her. You think about just just growing up, for me personally, I was born in 1982 and I was born pre-internet, pre all these things, like I was born at the time where you just knew to be home when the porch light came on because if you weren't home for dinner, you were in trouble. And nobody like that kind of thing that I do know how to use the computers and everything else, but and while a lot of people would consider me I'm 1982 was one of those years that sort of straddles the generations. It's between Gen X and millennial, and I tend to relate more strongly to Gen X than I do to millennials. But I do also have some traits and I know how to use all the internets and computers and things. But I also know how to do everything by hand. And I can actually tell you roughly what time it is and due north when I look at the sun. So, I can figure my life out. But sorry, getting off on tangents. But Lucretia has to deal with all of this. She has to deal with all of it in an unchanging with her triggers, with her trauma, with her PTSD, and and without a purpose. She doesn't even have she has to live, she doesn't want to be there, all these things, but like she's got nothing. And so she has to find something. Because how do you exist without something? And that's kind of and again, this is a lot of why the Lost Beacon Chronicles, this one's dark. This one and has a lot of trigger warnings for people, mostly emotional, a lot of them war because Ignited, which is coming out, I'm releasing it November 16th of this year, November 16th, 2023. The next book is coming out. And the cover reveal is on October 6th. But Ignited is actually about the Roman invasion of Britain that happened in 43 AD. And at least a lot of Americans, I'm sure more Brits are much familiar with that history because it's British history. And, much like all countries know their own history better because that's what you teach in schools, right? But I really enjoyed all of that because Lucretia, of course, I insert her into this and everything else, but and the Romans are called the Roimhi because the Roimhi is the name that the Catavalani, the tribe of the Britons, or the main one of the main people who almost pushed them back. That's what they called the Romans, according to what I've read. Again, I did, and I've learned a lot because there was a lot that I didn't know about the Roman invasion of Britain that I've learned just in my own research. So I'm getting to learn with these books, which is fun for me. But I insert her in there, and then we have her in there, and she is with Togodumnus and Karatakis, and I am coming up with other characters. Their mother is a character there. Which she obviously they had a mother, but the Roman historians didn't write about them, and also the histories that they were written by Roman historians. There are not British accounts because they didn't chronologue their history in the same way that they did, in a way that we have found at least, or, they just didn't record it in the same way that the Romans did, which was, on scrolls and things like that. So I tried to translate things into, okay, well, this is the Roman interpretation of this. So I'm going to turn it around and say, okay, well, how would the Catavalani possibly, and again, it's fantasy. The key here is historical fantasy. This is not going to be altogether accurate. I'm not trying to be altogether accurate. I am. There are going to be some accuracies in there, but that's not the point. The point is that I'm telling the story, but I'm inserting Lucretia into this time period in history, which is very tumultuous. And she and the Romans, or the Roimhi, are actually the ancestors of the Babylonians that genocided her people 600 years before. And she has been in a depression ever since. But this happening to the Catavalani, who took her in, because the Catavalani, in her mind, this rainy island at the quote-unquote edge of the world, to her mind, or her perception at the time, she was just trying to get away from everything, and they were just letting her live quietly with them, and she was happy with that. But then the Roimhi are coming, and she knows who their ancestors are. Keeping in mind, the Roimni don't know they don't know anything about the history in the way that they do, because victors write the history and they were told a different story that was passed down through generations. She actually knows the truth. She lived it, but she's the only one. And she becomes ignited. It's called ignited because it's her journey from depression into anger. And, it's ignited within her, and she, I won't say her personality changes, but her behavior, of course, changes, because she goes from being this solemn person who never ever smiles because she just can't bring herself to do it, to becoming, very violent and enraged and calculating in a very frightening way, in the way that she just wants to twist the knife in the people who are the ancestors of those who genocided her people, who killed everything she loved, who took it all away from her. And honestly, the Catavalani, they don't turn against her or anything, and she's their ally. She doesn't get scary to the point where they're like, whoa, go away. But they they see her change in behavior, and they see all of that, and it's definitely a different perception. You see that I talk about the changes in her behavior. I talk about how her change that's perceived by her own allies, and everything else, and I really enjoyed it. Again, I do have a great interest in psychology. I don't think I explain it terribly eloquently, but And as somebody who actually is a psychiatrist or psychologist, certainly my brother who, he's not a psychologist, but he got his bachelor's in psychology, could explain and articulate, the actual psychological terminologies and processes way better than I ever could. But I do find it fascinating, and I do enjoy exploring it and showcasing it in the character and using her process of grieving with these historical milestones that happened in our ancient history, but translating them into fantasy and even bringing back to life characters from the past. And of course, my interpretation of those characters, this is complete fiction, but it's really fun. Anyway, I'm going off on tangents, but that is the Lost Beacon Chronicles, and that Ignited is going to be really cool, I think. I really love Ignited. It's something that it's very different for me as a writer. It's it's actually the first novel that I wrote that didn't have a romantic subplot. There Yeah, it didn't, though there are other relationships that I really enjoyed exploring, like, Togodumnus and Karatakis are 2 brothers, and they are Togodumnus and Karatakis are, the Togodumnus was the chieftain of the Katavalani tribe when the Romans started invading. He died in the middle of the whole situation, and Karatakis, being his younger brother, then took over, but the 2 brothers, fought together, all of that in history. And at least I didn't find any notes on their relationship, their personal relationship, other than the fact that they were brothers and they fought side by side. But I have a great relationship with my siblings. I love my siblings very much. We're very, and I consider, especially my brother and my sister too, to be some of my best friends, in addition to being, my siblings. And so I having that sibling relationship experience for myself, I really focused on the brotherhood, the friendship and, brotherhood of Togodumnus and Karatakis, but not just in the sense of being related by blood, but by, the true sense of, like, they are true brothers in the sense of all emotion, and how they relate to each other and feel about each other, and the concern that one has for the other, and everything else. The bond between siblings, sometimes, it's something that I feel very strongly about personally. I love my siblings, and I very strongly about them, and I showcase this relationship more so with, in Ignited, which I love. I also showcase relationships between parent and child, and these are adult relationships. Their mother, again, their mother is not even mentioned in the historical documents that I found. She may have been dead by the time the whole Roman invasion happened, but they don't talk about that. So I decided that she was alive. And still a very strong, domineering figure, and I named her Briaca, which is an old, I looked up some old, Katavalani, Breton names, and Briaca, one with force and strength is what that means, and I was like, "That's the name of their mom." So they, and she is an old woman, but she's still very powerful. She's still recognized. She's very, very intelligent, but, uh, and I would say she's a good mother, but she's not a warm person. And she's a very good person, but she is a strong person. She's very stern and all of that. And I enjoyed writing that relationship as well between adult parent and adult child. Uh and that dynamic, how that would work. So I really enjoyed exploring a lot of different family relationships in this and I will continue to do so, but especially in Ignited, I really enjoyed exploring the different dynamics of that and how it they would relate to each other, and just how different interpretations of emotion and of behaviors and actions, reactions, and situations can cause different outcomes. And, you know, maybe things would have been different if somebody had thought differently of a certain action. Who knows? Anyway, dribbling on. I apologize. I said this was going to be a short one, and I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. But those are the difference between the two different series that I write. And I hope that you'll check them out. They're available on Amazon, they're available Barnes and Noble, they're available, all the places. And check out my website, hollisjoemccullumauthor.com. And I am going to be at the Time Travelers Book Fair with fellow YA fantasy author Elara Dunn, who wrote The Magic Locker, The Witch's Curse. And we're going to be there on September 30th. This is taking place in Acworth, Georgia. And really, really excited. Both be in costume. I'm gonna be probably just dressed up like a general elf. I don't think I'm going to do a specific character this time around. And Alara is going to be dressed up like a witch. So we're gonna have a lot of fun, and her husband is actually carving pumpkins. We're gonna actually have jack-o'-lanterns at our booth. I am super excited. Is super cool. Very grateful to them for making awesome, awesome jack-o'-lanterns. Yeah, I'm thrilled about that. So yeah, we're gonna have a really cool booth. We're gonna be dressed up because we are cosplayers who cannot help ourselves. and and come meet us, come check us out. There will be a lot of other great authors there as well. We might be the coolest. Maybe. If you come and find out, that's how you'll know for sure. So come see us at the Time Travelers Book Fair in Acworth, Georgia on September 30th. That is a Saturday. And I believe it starts at 10 a.m. It like goes from like 10 to late afternoon sometime, like 5 o'clock or something like that, which is great. I think that's great. I think that's a good amount of time. And I'll really look forward to seeing everyone. I appreciate all of your understanding that I am no longer going to be doing a lot of episodes. I'll be doing one episode a month. I promise. I'll try to do it middle of the month, every month, to keep some consistency rolling. And I'll continue to post on Instagram, post on all the places. And I promise to keep writing. But that is my priority now. So I wish you all a very, very good night.